Hey everyone, we're going to have terrible audio for this entire video simply because I did not turn on my third-party recording, so I do apologize. In this video, we're going to cover things like the Office of Inspector General report. We're also going to cover a little bit about the hospital transparency and pricing. Then we're going to talk about Pharma.org and a report that they came out with on why Medicare Part D negotiations and kind of our entire healthcare system is flawed. And I'm going to go into a little bit of commentary. You know how I am. So if it's the first time you're watching, be prepared for a relatively long, in-depth video with some, commentary. I'm not just reading off slides. I'm definitely not just reading off slides. And just kind of get a feel on what's going on and give you guys a little bit more context of what's kind of happening out there, and not just reading headlines, not just kind of going along with what everyone else is saying and what the major media outlets are putting out. So let's get to it. Okay, so first, the Department of Health and Human Services, they kind of govern CMS. What this report is showing that the Office of Inspector General has given CMS $498 million of overpayments to physicians. This is not Medicare Advantage. This is just traditional Medicare Parts A and B, and I believe most of this has to do with Medicare Part B, as in boy, so doctor and outpatient services. Now, Medicare, and I like to talk about original Medicare because it is kind of like the most non-restrictive medical insurance that you can get. Under normal circumstances, like if you have group medical insurance with your company, you have a marketplace plan from healthcare.gov, or you have a Medicare Advantage plan, those plans are all governed by an insurance company. The insurance company has the kind of contractual obligation, so to speak, to make sure that whatever service your doctor is requesting is appropriate. Now, with original Medicare Parts A and B, many of those services that would normally be under the purview of an insurance company are not. So what does that mean? It means from one side of the coin, from your side of the coin, that I can get whatever care I want as long as it's medically necessary and my doctor agrees that it is medically necessary. On the flip side, it can be where the doctor can now say that this is medically necessary for you in, I guess you could say, with the goal of having their pocket lined by the government. How? Well, if there's not enough clinical evidence or evidence medically to say this client or this patient requires this care or this service, the doctor can order it. Sometimes doctors can order a service and not even provide the service because, well, who's really checking for many of these services that don't require, number one, a prior authorization, and number two, clinical data or notes to be provided. And this report just goes over in depth a lot of that kind of missing information that when the Office of Inspector General went to go look for said information or said proof or said medical data, it was not there. Medicare CMS has always been really, really bad at kind of doing this. For whatever reason, in this report, it goes on to say that many of the, well, at least 4 of the 7, I guess, audit reports that the Office of Inspector General prepared, only 3 or 4 of them were actually followed up on. The rest were kind of given up on, I guess, from Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Now, this would be good. See, and this is where my commentary comes in. It's really weird, okay? So when you think of Medicare is running out of money. What does that mean? It means that it's costing the taxpayers a lot of money. Well, why is it running out of money? 2 reasons, right? Reason number 1 is from the patient standpoint, is that patients are just getting sicker, so things are costing more money, and therefore Medicare is obviously going to run out of money because people's expenses medically are going up. We have more expensive technology available. Therefore, Medicare is obviously underfunded, right? Another reason from the same patient side is that doctors are now siphoning out more money from Medicare due to these loopholes where they can provide services. A huge case in the 80s where physicians were supposedly ordering things like wheelchairs, things like prosthetics, things like, oxygen from Medicare, saying, hey, Medicare, we're going to bill for all these items, and then just make up or just use patients' kind of data and not charge the patients, but, Medicare is paying for 80% of it, right? Then turn around and sell these equipment that they got at pretty much an 80% discount because Medicare is paying for 80% of it, right? And sell it for 100% and making a killing off taxpayers' money. And that's where the flip side goes. So while yes, these doctors, if they're fraudulent, maybe it's because there's no other way to survive. But what that's doing is just taking away money from the taxpayers, because Medicare Parts A and B are funded 100% by taxpayer money, which is why I get so kind of riled up when I see these Medicare Advantage companies are raking in profits and denying care and creating these really non-sufficient networks. But in this case as well, we have doctors and patients potentially, I'm not saying that they're doing this on purpose. This could be something called waste, where they're not trying to fraud the system or they're not trying to steal money from the system. They're just utilizing, or they're just saying, hey, my patient really wants this service. I think, it'll set my patient's mind at ease. Medically speaking, there's really nothing there that's pointing me in this direction. But you know what? To make my patient feel better, we're going to run all these extra tests because it'll just set their mind at ease. And potentially we'll have it'll be better for the patient's mental and kind of overall well-being if I listen, I run these tests, I provide some kind of a result, because that's kind of, that's how I would feel. I would feel very, happy if my physician listened and in turn ran all these tests that I, my medically crazy mind said to run. But that's waste, and that wastes the taxpayers' money, right? It's wasteful because when the service goes in, it has to be processed. If it's a test, the labs have to run a test. Somebody has to interpret that test. Then you have to come back for the results. That process is not free, right? It takes money to run each one of those independent businesses, to pay those employees. All that stuff costs the system money. And from a governmental standpoint, we are stealing from each other, right? Because this is funded by the government, which is funded by us. Therefore, we are stealing money from ourselves, really just distributing it to, other people, really. And that's kind of where it's really gray, right? So the Office of Inspector General, so their report, they have their full report. You can go ahead and download it. I'll see if I can find it and leave the link in the YouTube video and also in the email if you are on the email list. Another thing about Medicare and price transparency. We're going to talk a little bit more about price a little bit later, but this price transparency has everything to do with hospital transparency. I talked many times about the hospital transparency law that went into effect this year. Now, hospitals are unable to comply because they have to compile all this data and figure out what they can actually publish, because many of their reimbursement rates are tailored toward insurance company reimbursement rates, right? And that's kind of how they get paid. Most hospitals don't have a menu of services and tell you how much every one of these things costs, because it would be unused. Like most people, like if I went to the hospital, I'm not paying out of pocket. I'm not paying full price cash for all these things. I have medical insurance. I have a copay, right? And then the insurance company, they have their kind of negotiation with the hospital prior to my surgery, probably when the plan I signed up with was created, and they have their kind of negotiated rate that they'll get reimbursed if I went to go in for this procedure, right? So there's no way that I would know. But what now they're tasked with the Hospital Transparency Act, they're tasked with is to actually create and publish said list, said menu of services. And they're obviously not able to do that. I think in my last video, I talked maybe like 9% actually were able to produce such a list. And it's hurting the hospitals because for every day that they are negligent in creating this list, they are fined anywhere between $500 to $3,000 per, I think, act line item in negligence. So it's hurting. And the health insurance companies also have to kind of battle with this as well, because they're also kind of in the same loop. They have to be able to create a list of prices. Let's say I'm going in for an MRI at XYZ hospital. And at XYZ hospital, an MRI retails for $4,000. So my 20% co-insurance will be $800, right? The insurance companies can't do that unless they know how much the hospital is going to charge them, but the hospital can't figure out what they're going to charge them because they charge insurance companies all different rates. And if we had all this data compiled together, maybe we could make better choices. But that then poses a competitive disadvantage for everyone who doesn't know what everyone else has, right? It creates this different kind of business dynamic where if, let's say, my insurance company has a 10% copay on an $8,000 MRI, whereas another company has a 20% copay on a $4,000 MRI at the same hospital, it's going to look weird. Hospital is going to be considered fraudulent, whereas that's just how they price things to two different insurance companies, right? Their insurance company adjusted rate may be exactly the same, so the insurance companies pay the hospital the same amount, and the patient gets charged the same amount, but because of their long succession of negotiations, this is just how the cookie crumbles, just how the kind of dominoes fall. And that's just how it's been. So now we're changing all of that, and that's why it's becoming very difficult. It's not that there's like fraud going on behind the scenes. If there is, it's not just one company, it's everybody. If you guys ever seen The Big Short, most of big anything runs like that. Just thought I'd let you guys know. That movie, by the way, I saw for the first time this past weekend. While there are some things they could have left out, swearing, certain scenes that I don't think really put any meat onto the movie, the overall way that the movie played out is pretty much how I feel that many times these larger entities, larger industries are run. And you can watch Too Big to Fail. That was a great movie as well. I watched that when it first came out. And Margin Call. Those are probably the three movies that are wrapped around the same event. And you can kind of look at it through different ways. The Big Short is kind of how the shorts found it. Too Big to Fail is like the government's response. It's from the standpoint of like the people in the government, what they actually did and how they kind of handled it. And Margin Call is one of the companies that actually was on the buying side, the long side of these securities, and kind of what they had to do when they found out what was going on. Next, I want to talk about Pharma.org. So Pharma.org is a website. Supposedly it's a educational, informational, research-based website sponsored by tons of pharmaceutical companies. Now, I'm going to take some data that they're talking about because it could actually impact the price negotiations that I've been talking about in a lot of my videos. And I tell you, right, it's a good thing, but the implementation, if happens, may put our Medicare Part D program in an actual worse state than it already is. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the money is not there to support such a, plan with a $2,000 cap on Part D drug spending. And of course, the Part B negotiation might actually hinder access to a lot of these more or new medications. They may actually, after they pass this law, pass other laws where, the newest medications may not be available just because they're FDA approved, unlike currently where, as you folks might know, the newest medications, as long as they meet a treatment guideline, they have to be covered by Medicare. That's just part of the rules. You have to have access to every treatment plan that's available. And if there's only one medication in this one treatment protocol, then that medication has to be approved. They might change the rules on some of that in the future. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, just briefly, that this article is definitely going to be in the perspective or with the kind of focus on the pharmaceutical industry and how much they're helping to support and stave off illnesses and make the quality of life better. That's just what it is. But we can take some data and some perspectives from their side and kind of think about it for you folks, because again, people who are retiring, people who are retired, people who are on Medicare looking to get onto the Medicare program, many of these issues are going to be, really important to you. So now we kind of know what Pharma.org is, kind of know where their data and what they're looking at is kind of biased towards. What they have done here is they have created kind of the implications of the drug price provisions in reconciliation. And basically there are problems with having the government setting prices, how the pharmaceutical company looks at it from an incentives standpoint, and it really doesn't do anything to help patients afford medications. So currently, the way that the government is saying that, hey, pharmaceutical companies, you can't, charge too much. You have to do either the maximum fair price or pay 95% sales tax on the medication. So in this example, they said that if the medication is $100, the pharmaceutical company, if they charge more, they'd have to charge a $1,900 tax liability for the sale of said medication. So if the government decides that the maximum fair price for a medication is $100, but the pharmaceutical company has to sell it for more because for whatever reason the medication costs the company more, they cannot, as a pharmaceutical company, make a business out of selling this medication for the $100 fair value, then they will have to pay a substantial tax. Now think about this. If they are unable to match the government price, they're going to price the thing into oblivion, right? They're going to say, okay, well, you know what, government, we're not going to accept your price. We're going to charge $10,000 for this medication because we have to make up for this 95% tax that you are charging us. And so they're going to do that. They're going to make the medication $10,000 or whatever it is, just so that they can have the 95% tax liability and make, what would that be, $500 on this medication. Now the government gets the way they get their money, right? But where would all of those, where would that money go? Would it go back to Part D so that you actually can afford this medication, and even though you're being charged $10,000 retail, it comes out to $500? Will your Medicare Part D plan even cover it? Right? What are these implications, and how are they going to handle that? Right? As you know, or maybe you don't know, it is far easier to pay civil penalties for most industries than it is to do what the actual law was intended to. Give you one quick example. The Stock Act. So I'm a big finance person, right? I follow finance, I day trade, I create models, I create technical analysis for myself. Okay, that's what I love to do. That's what I do every waking moment that I'm not looking at Medicare and figuring out how to help my clients. Okay, the Stock Act. It makes sure that all people who are in political power, all people who have a government seat, have to disclose buys and sells of stocks. They have to do this within 45 to 90 days of the purchase or the sale. There are some Congress people who have not posted what they've done for over a year. They don't care. The civil penalties are $50 to $100 and they can be waived for unforeseen circumstances, right? Who's the biggest lobbying arm in the government? The biggest lobbying arm? Well, one of the two. The pharmaceutical industry. The second one, the insurance industry. So, if this were to pass, imagine of all the loopholes that would have to have been already created and built into this bill in order for it to have gotten through the entire three-step Congress process, right? So I don't think it's going to help anybody really, and it may just be kind of a fake win for whoever wants this to happen, right? Now the second thing that it could hurt is access. So currently right now, the US has the most access to the newest treatments and cures, right? Followed by Germany, UK, France, Canada, Japan, and Australia. All of these other countries do not have access to as many new treatments as the US does, primarily because the US pays whatever the pharmaceutical company wants, pretty much, right? So it might restrict access. Now, the bill itself doesn't talk about how it'll be restricted or how things will be restricted, but it will hurt kind of the innovation. And let's talk a little bit about that innovation. If this negotiation went into effect, pharmaceutical companies would not be as incentivized to make new treatments. They probably would most likely go into repackaging a lot of their old medications as more of a way to drive profits. Think about it this way. To get a new medication through the 4 stages of clinical trials, get all the approvals, pass through the FDA is very expensive and a lot of risk, right? You have to hire all these doctors, do all this research, hire all these test subjects, get all the data, push the data through. It takes years, and it also takes money. Now, all of this money, if the FDA doesn't approve or something goes wrong during the trials, it's gone. You don't get a reset and say, hey, maybe we should have spent that $100 million somewhere else. It's gone, right? For the company anyway. So they're going to go into more safer, less explorative types of research simply because there's no money to sustain it. And that's where all these things could be missing if we do not, or if we have more restrictive legislation against drug pricing, because the pharmaceutical industry, and this is directly from the pharmaceutical industry, is saying that they just wouldn't have the kind of incentive to do this. Additionally, many of the new treatments also help other things other than their initial intended use. So when something is FDA approved, it really doesn't mean that that's the end of said medication. The medication might go through the entire let's call it 4 years of development, and then it gets approved. And then 5 years later, we find that it also helps in this other part of, I believe Jardiance, right? So Jardiance I talked about in my congestive heart failure video. Jardiance is a diabetes medication, it's an insulin medication, it's an SLGT2 something with it, it's either an inhibitor or some kind of activator. So what that does is it helps people with diabetes better control or limit the amount of insulin that they need. We found that because it's not an insulin itself, so it doesn't pump more insulin into you, it just kind of helps you regulate your blood glucose. That's really good for people who have congestive heart failure. So now that medication is being used for another ailment to create better outcomes for people with a completely different disease. So all of those things can play into, having more new medication available, just having more treatment options available that could potentially help a completely different disease than originally anticipated for, if we can just find and make things that are better for you, right? That create better outcomes health-wise. Heck, it might create better outcomes health-wise for someone else who's suffering from a different disease. And what they're saying is this limitation on incentives or for the pharmaceutical companies may and will limit the amount of, auxiliary benefits that making new medications entails. An example they use here is for cancer medication. 60% of oncology medications approved over a decade ago are approved to treat additional cancers today. So it could be why we have such lower amounts of cancer mortality is because we have so much more medications that we came to market over 10 years ago that are able to better treat different types of cancers today. So we don't have to get new cancer medications for a particular cancer. We already have a medication that treats cancer of another type that actually works just as well for this type that we're working on or dealing with today. And here's the rub, and here's what I always talk about. Okay, so how does this translate into actual people? Well, maybe not me, but you and everyone else on the Medicare Part B program. Is this actually going to help you afford medications? Well, it looks like this does not. And it saves the government $300 billion, but only $25 billion goes to improving Part D benefit. It doesn't lower the co-insurance for most seniors in Part D, and it doesn't address abusive insurance practices or stop them from shifting the cost of medicines to patients. I talked a lot about how the pharmaceutical companies have a price, right? And there's pharmacy benefit managers, and then there's the pharmacy, and then there's the insurance company. And the insurance company can get rebates or give rebates to pharmacies, PBMs, which manage that relationship. They're also with their hand, and they're giving and providing discounts to pharmacies and potentially insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. And all that entire chain happens behind the scenes of the patient. So I talked about before how one medication could be $100 at one pharmacy and $400 at a different one with a different plan. And the reason is because, well, that particular plan has less people buying that particular medication. That's why it's $400 instead of $100. But the discounts and all those rebates take place behind the scenes. So the patient has already paid all that money up front. And as you know, Part D plans reset every year. So there's no way you can quote unquote redeem or profit or get any money back from the backdoor end of your transactions that happens to the PBM. Now, again, it's much more complicated. It's not that simple. There's other things that go into it, other things that I'm not talking about because I simply don't know about. But that's kind of where it talks about how the practices here doesn't address the abusive insurance practices or stop them from shifting the cost of medications to patients. So fortunately, they gave us some solutions, right? Many times, many things I talk about have no solutions because I'm not in policy. I don't have the ability to change anything, and I also don't know what the implications of said changes would ensue. So let's see what they have to say. So make sure patients share in our savings industry provides. Make what seniors pay out of pocket for medicines more affordable and predictable. Address insurance practices that shift costs to patients and restrict access to care. Now, here's the rub. How do we do any of this, right? Honestly, how? And guess what? They don't go into it in this slide. So the next slides are kind of softening the actual cost of prescription drugs and saying that, yeah, based on the inflation rate, prescription drugs only have gone up 2.5%. Nothing compared to gasoline, energy, and food, right? They also say that hospital costs are way higher than the overall prescription drug costs, which is true. And they also say that the growth of prescription drug costs has been really low over the past, 5 years. So is this really where we should be focusing our attention to? Is this really the core cause of our medical problems? And I'm going to say the answer is no, but it is a problem for those people who it's a problem for. I talk about this many times. So I'm a statistical loving person, right? For those of you who don't know, but there's something called a normal distribution curve. The normal distribution curve encapsulates about 67% of the distribution of something. So let's say we have a population of 100 people. We can say that within normal distribution, 67 of those people have very normal behavior, very normal societal norms, very normal kind of health, right? And that's how we're going to define normal. And then we take one standard deviation outside of that, which would take us to the 95 percentile. 95% is 2 standard deviations. So most times 95% of the people who are in this 95 groups, 95 people, will not experience much beyond that. They won't experience that 5%. But there are still 5 people who probably end up in the donut hole every year, who end up paying $8, $9, $10, $20,000 in drug costs. And those people are the ones that could either really benefit from this program or not benefit at all if the program is put together poorly. The 95 percentile people, maybe half of those people, right? From 67% to 95, that increase of, let's say, what's that, 25-ish people, those folks, 28 actually, may see some benefit. The normal distribution, the 67 people, 67% of this fictitious 100 people group that we put together, nothing will happen. It'll be like this thing hasn't even gone through, except their benefits may become more expensive. They may have less access to the care that they need when they need it because these negotiations have taken place and things have fell off of the Medicare approved drug list. Right? If they get sicker and they become one of the 95 percentile folks, or the, outside of 2 standard distributions group, those 5 people, they might become one of those 5 people. So is it really helping? And from a grander, huge scale of things, Medicare Part D spending is such a small amount of spending when it comes to how much the hospitals eat up and how much, surgeries and outpatient and doctor kind of payments come in, right? We haven't even begun to talk about Part B medications and how Part B drugs are administered and their costs. So is it really, this big of an issue to be tackling? And if you're tired and you don't want to watch anymore, that's fine. We don't have to, because right now I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that's just how a lot of things happen. That's just how everything goes on, right? So I'm done with the meat of this. I'm just going to talk about kind of like my flavorings. So Medicare deals with a lot of their problems, not from the core problem. And that's what a lot of these policies and Congress things talk about, right? Like, for example, in Texas, there's things on their agenda talking about repealing the Civil Rights Act. Why would you even consider repealing the Civil Rights Act? Just wasting time. All this data that these people put together to combat and to give education, to bring enlightenment to people who are actually looking at this. I'm probably one of the 10 people that downloaded this little slideshow here. And all of it is to just create headlines, create fear, create a narrative that ultimately is looking at this huge problem, right? Huge problem of the United Healthcare system. And then picking out a little fragment and looking at it and say, hey, we can fix this. If we fix this, this will be better. Not thinking about, why don't we just try and fix this? And going to fix this would be difficult. It'd be very difficult. But it could be a start. And I will say, yes, you can argue with me. This is a start. This is something, a step in the right direction. Potentially. Or we could have just created even more policy that we would have to unwind when we unwind this entire thing of United States healthcare. And I'm going to go into a personal thing right now. So, I went to the doctor's office. I got a referral to see an ENT for my chronic migraines, right? Because I have chronic migraines. It's probably because of all the stuff that I have to read every day. But I have chronic migraines, and my neurologist said it could be something to do with maybe because my sinuses trigger my migraines sometimes, that I could have sinus problems. So I go to an ENT. I get a referral from my primary care doctor in my HMO, in the hospital system that my insurance company owns and runs and partners with. I go there to my ENT doctor after 2 weeks of waiting. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't wait for my referral to be approved. So you can tell where this story is going. But it was more than 2 weeks, and again, I shouldn't have been able to make this appointment unless it was approved, because both the hospital system that my plan is and runs and my plan itself is all run by the same show. So I go, get my visit, give me some nasal, sprays, 2 different nasal sprays, and come see me in 3 months. Sounds good. Medications. My medications were approved. No problem. The visit, though, was manually denied. I'm trying to figure out how my visit was manually denied, even though I had it put in by my system, by my insurance company's hospital. The PCP sent a referral, which I assume would have been approved, because I got the visit, and I got a call before my visit to confirm my visit, thinking, hey, it's probably approved. I mean, you guys are the insurance company. And then they approved my medications, which are prescribed by a physician. Perhaps the visit wasn't even authorized. So in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, this visit's got to be authorized, right? Come to find out 2 weeks later, potentially it's not, because it's got manually denied. Now, I myself will most likely win if I fight this. But I'm just saying, for people who are just a regular healthcare consumers out there, you open up your app and you see a $500 bill for a service that you thought would be covered, you're quite shocked, right? Most likely, and my wife concurs with me, is that they just have to review it. And they're not going to automatically approve it for whatever reason, because they need to hire more people to look into claims. Who cares? It's supporting the economy, I guess, hiring all these people. But makes the member of the plan stressed out. Like me, looking at it, like $505. It's a huge visit. I mean, I already paid for 10%. My copay was $50, so I guess I paid for some of it at least, right? 10% down payment. But it is kind of a shocker. And it just shows how discombobulated and broken the healthcare system is, because I would think that I'm fairly well integrated into my healthcare system, right? I'm part of a plan. It's an HMO that has all the hospitals in one place, and I only go to the one place. Every place I go is the hospital's name and the hospital clinic. They're all inside the HMO, and I schedule everything through the scheduler inside the organization. But still, nothing. Additionally, my lab work. So, I go get my labs done, and this is way back, July 7th or 9th or something. I go for pay, right? Because I'm thinking, well, labs, usually there's like a small copay, $10, $15. They say no copay. Great, no copay. I guess because it's part of my preventative panel or whatever, or because it's with my annual physical. Then I get a bill for $75 saying that my blood work was denied. How can this be, right? So, again, same thing. I probably will contest it, and I probably will end up winning. But that does not really go to show with what the normal, regular healthcare consumer would. I have the number one benefit of being a health insurance agent. Now, most agents don't look this far, but I do, because I'm very, very detail-oriented and very anal when it comes to things like this. Sorry for my language. And my wife is in the medical field herself. So we most likely would be able to finagle some kind of a positive resolution for my case. But many people aren't. Many people aren't. And I just feel sad for everyone like that, you know? If I were someone who got a bill, who saw that my $50 specialty visit, which I've been waiting for 2 years, was denied payment, and I already went, and I was living on a fixed income, and my $50 copay, which was already pretty hard to swallow, has turned into a $500 copay, I'd be stressed out. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would be on the phone with my agent asking what the heck went wrong. And in my case, there is no agent. Sign up with the work plan, right? Who am I supposed to call? Sorry, just Ghostbusters theme song popped in my head. But what do you do? What do you do? I don't know. What I intend to do, though, is hopefully set up some kind of a website, resources, protocol, places to go to really help. Because I'll be honest, next year I probably won't do any Medicare Part D plans or Medicare Part C plans. The compliance for Medicare agents now is that we have to, number one, record all of our Medicare Part D and Medicare Part C conversations. We have to record it on the phone. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So I probably won't. You can still use my links to purchase Medicare Part D. I will give you guidance on how to do that, but I won't be selling it to you, so to speak. Which does help me, because you use the link that I have in my little, my shopping cart. That does help the channel out, helps me provide this kind of information to you. But it's changing. And it's changing to where I believe that they want to somehow squeeze the agent out of it and make it so complicated to just have us all be kind of employees of the company. Because meaning the Medicare Advantage or Medicare Part D space, I think they're going to be kind of absorbed and put into some kind of a government system. It just feels that way. It just does. We have this magnitude of policies being, I don't want to say shifted, but being morphed into something else, something that is not. Heck, this might be the next bubble, right? The healthcare bubble, if it's not already a bubble. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It's more of a resource side, which is gonna suck because it probably means that I'm gonna have to work. I have to go to a regular job. But I think that's probably for the best, because it's really difficult to be able to help my clients and also be able to educate and be able to kind of tell what's going on behind the scenes, because these are the things that I want to know, right? I want to know why is this system so jammed up? Like, how come it's so difficult? Like, it seems like it should be so easy, but it's so difficult, right? We got all these things in place, all these different players touching this stuff. You think we have the best team in the world. We don't. Anyway, that sums up everything. You guys have a great rest of the week. I apologize for this long video. It's just a lot going on right now. I have to go back to trading. Today is a rather choppy day. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great week. Do good things and be well. Bye-bye now.